Have you ever witnessed a scene where someone is publicly humiliated simply for not seeming to belong there? That uncomfortable situation where the silence is heavy, glances are averted, and no one dares to intervene? Well, what you're about to discover might surprise you a lot. Imagine a luxury movie theater, one of those with wide seats, discreet lighting, and a carefully selected audience. An environment where every detail seems to reinforce the idea of exclusivity, status, and power. There, sitting in that premium room isn't just watching a movie, it's almost a silent declaration of who you are, or who you believe yourself to be. And it's precisely in this setting that the story begins to take a wrong turn from the very first seconds. Among the spectators is a billionaire known for his arrogant demeanor, someone accustomed to being recognized, respected, and obeyed without needing to raise his voice. People like him enter any place certain that they belong there, certain that the world has been shaped to accommodate their desires. The kind of man who measures value by money, by surname, and by the power he wields over others. Everything seems to be under control, until something goes completely off script. A few rows ahead, seated calmly, is a black woman, discreet, elegant in her own way, self-assured. She doesn't draw attention, doesn't seek glances, doesn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. She simply occupies her place, like anyone else. But for that billionaire, her mere presence in that space is interpreted as a mistake that, in his mind, needs to be corrected. And then the comments begin. First in hushed tones, almost like a joke, then indirect remarks that are anything but innocent. A sideways glance here, a whisper there, until the embarrassment ceases to be veiled and becomes public. Humiliation settles in the air, heavy, uncomfortable. Employees hesitate, spectators pretend not to notice, and the atmosphere of exclusivity transforms into a silent stage of inequality and prejudice. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever felt that burning sense of injustice inside, while someone uses power or money to diminish another person? That's exactly the indignation that begins to grow in those who watch this scene. Because, even without knowing all the details, something there sounds profoundly wrong. There's an invisible line being crossed, and the viewer feels almost instinctively that this story, it can't end this way. While the billionaire grows increasingly comfortable in his position of superiority, the black woman remains silent, not out of fear, not out of submission, but out of a disconcerting calm, a firm posture, a confident gaze, as if she knows something that others don't yet know. And it is in this contrast that the tension increases. The more he tries to diminish it, the more evident it becomes that something is out of place in this humiliation. Stay with me until the end of this story, because every detail matters. Nothing here is by chance. What seems to be just another episode of arrogance and disrespect slowly begins to reveal deeper layers. And the more you watch this scene in the movie theater, the more you realize that the billionaire may be much more mistaken than he imagines. Because sometimes the biggest mistake isn't talking too much, it's underestimating those who remain silent. And it's precisely from that moment, when the humiliation seems to have reached its peak, that something begins to stir behind the scenes, preparing a twist that no one in that room, especially him, is ready to face. And as this scene unfolds before everyone's eyes, it's impossible not to feel something stirring inside. Because in some way, this story touches on wounds that many people know well. The silent humiliation, the judgment based on appearance, the feeling of not being welcome in a space that theoretically should be for everyone. Perhaps you've never been to a luxury movie theater, but you've certainly experienced or witnessed situations where someone was belittled without having done absolutely anything to deserve it. And that's precisely why this story matters. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below, sharing what has touched you the most so far. It could be a personal experience, a memory, or even an opinion you've always kept to yourself, but never had the chance to express. When you comment, this story stops being just mine or yours and becomes ours. Each account creates a chain of identification that strengthens those who watch and shows that no one is alone in these situations. Meanwhile, the movie theater remains silent, but the weight of what is happening is impossible to ignore. The black woman stands there composed, breathing calmly, as if she knows that this moment of embarrassment does not define who she is. And the self-assured billionaire has no idea how much his composure is about to be put to the test. It is at this point that the story begins to gain even greater strength, because it speaks not only of power or money, but of dignity. If at any point you felt your heart tighten or that silent indignation grow, consider liking this video. It's not just an automatic gesture. Liking shows that this type of content needs to continue existing, that stories of poetic justice, reverse humiliation, and social upheavals need to reach more people. That's how the algorithm understands that this message deserves to be spread. And if you've made it this far, maybe this channel is already speaking to you in some way. So subscribe, stick around. Here, each story is told with the care of someone who knows that behind every scene there is a real person with real feelings. Your subscription helps the channel grow, reach more people, and continue bringing narratives that make us reflect, feel emotional, and sometimes see the world with different eyes. The truth is that nothing happening in that room is small or insignificant. Every look, every unspoken word, every silence builds something much bigger than a simple misunderstanding. And as you read the comments, share your perspective, and connect with others who feel the same way, the story slowly unfolds. Because what comes next will show that some humiliations don't go unanswered. They just wait for the right moment to transform into something no one can ignore. The atmosphere in that room begins to shift almost imperceptibly, but in a profoundly unsettling way. The billionaire, now more confident that no one will contradict him, abandons any attempt at disguise. His tone of voice rises slightly, not enough to cause an explicit scandal, but loud enough to be heard by those nearby. There's something calculated about it, as if he knows exactly how far he can go without being questioned. The money, the surname, the posture of someone accustomed to being obeyed act as an invisible armor. He's not just talking to that black woman, he's asserting power. The employees notice. It's visible in the way they exchange quick glances, their bodies leaning slightly back, as if preferring not to get involved. Nobody wants to make a mistake. Nobody wants to pick a fight with someone who clearly occupies a high social position. The elitist environment, which once seemed elegant and neutral, now reveals its inner workings, a space where unwritten hierarchies decide who can speak and who must remain silent. The silence becomes heavy, almost deafening, and each second seems to stretch longer than it should. Meanwhile, the black woman remains there. She doesn't over-explain herself, doesn't try to prove anything, doesn't justify herself to please. Her posture is firm, but calm. There is no explicit challenge, only a solid, confident presence that contrasts violently with the billionaire's arrogance. This contrast begins to generate a curious discomfort in the observer, because in stories like this, one expects the humiliated person to back down, lower their head, apologize even without guilt. But she doesn't, and this detail changes everything. The billionaire perceives this firmness as an affront. For someone with his mindset, not reacting as expected is almost an insult. That's when the humiliation deepens, the words gain more weight, the comments become more direct, and the embarrassment ceases to be merely an uncomfortable social situation, transforming into a clear attempt to put someone in their place. He truly believes he is teaching a lesson, a demonstration of who commands and who obeys. This is the point where the story ceases to be just about an isolated episode and begins to address something larger. Decisions based on appearances, quick judgments, a mentality shaped by privileges that are rarely questioned. The audience feels this. Those who watch begin to identify with it, because this dynamic is not exclusive to that cinema. It repeats itself in companies, restaurants, elevators, meetings, queues, interviews. The hidden truth is that many have already been on one side of this unequal scale, feeling firsthand the impact of not being taken seriously. And the more the billionaire relies on his surroundings, the more evident the power imbalance becomes. He speaks as if he's certain nothing will happen, as if he's never been contradicted, as if he's made wrong decisions in the past and never had to deal with the consequences. His overconfidence blinds him. He doesn't notice the small signs, ignores details, underestimates the silence of the woman in front of him. He doesn't understand that sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. It's someone observing, evaluating, waiting for the right moment. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because this is where the story begins to transform into a true emotional journey. What's at stake isn't just public humiliation, but how choices made in seconds can reveal so much about who we are. The impact of that moment transcends the movie theater. It touches on themes like identity, respect, and how power shapes behavior. Every word spoken there builds something that goes far beyond what the characters can perceive at that instant. The black woman, by standing firm, silently disrupts this dynamic. She doesn't need to raise her voice to make an impact. Her stance questions everything the billionaire believes about control, authority, and value. It's as if, without saying anything, she's showing that the situation isn't as simple as it seems, and this begins to generate an almost physical tension in the air, a feeling that something important is about to emerge from behind the scenes. Those who observe carefully realize that this is not just a scene of humiliation, but the beginning of a transformation. The mindset of someone who considers himself untouchable begins to be tested, even if he doesn't yet know it. A silent journey is taking place there, made up of small gestures, restrained glances, and decisions that will soon clash with a reality he never considered. And the more he insists on exercising power, the closer he gets to a truth that will turn everything upside down. This type of story reminds us that social upheavals rarely arise out of nowhere. They are built step by step through the accumulation of attitudes, overconfidence, and the inability to see the other as an equal. The real impact lies not only in the revelation that has yet to happen, but in the tension that builds before it. It is this discomfort that grips, that makes the heart race, and that prepares the ground for something much bigger. And as this invisible pressure grows, it becomes clear that the scene is far from over. Something is stirring behind what is visible, something that hasn't yet been said, but is already beginning to weigh heavily. It is at this point that the story slowly veers in an unexpected direction, opening up space for revelations that will completely redefine the role of each person in that room. If all of this resonated with you so far, comment below. This makes sense to me. There's a curious moment in stories like this where the tension shifts from what's said to the details. Small gestures that at first glance seem irrelevant, but begin to unsettle those who observe attentively. And it's precisely there that something silently changes in that movie theater. Because while the billionaire remains convinced he's in control, subtle signs emerge that he might be ignoring something fundamental. The black woman remains seated, her posture erect, her shoulders relaxed, as if she feels no need to defend herself. There is no rigidity in her body, no nervousness in her hands. On the contrary, there is an almost disconcerting calm, the kind that doesn't come from someone who is cornered, but from someone who knows exactly where she stands. This detail goes unnoticed by many, but not by those who understand that true security rarely makes a sound. Her mentality is not one of confrontation, but of observation. At a certain moment, while the atmosphere is still tense, she answers a quick call. Nothing flashy, a simple, almost automatic gesture, but the way she speaks slightly changes the atmosphere around her. Her voice is low, firm, objective. There's no rush, no apology for being there, just a few words spoken naturally, like someone resolving something routine. A name is mentioned, a surname that doesn't resonate loudly enough for everyone to hear, but which, if someone paid closer attention, they would realize is not just any name. The billionaire, immersed in his own arrogance, completely ignores this scene. He is too busy reaffirming his position, stuck on the idea that power is something visible, noisy, that needs to be imposed. The possibility of being wrong doesn't even cross his mind. This is a silent, almost automatic decision to underestimate. And underestimating is often the first step towards downfall. The hidden truth begins to take shape precisely at this point. Behind the scenes of what seems obvious, those who observe begin to sense that something is out of place. It's not just empathy for the humiliated woman. It's an unsettling intuition that the story isn't following the expected script. The contrast between his arrogance and her tranquility creates a fissure in the narrative, because truly displaced people tend to over-justify themselves, to ask permission to exist in that space. And she does none of that. She is simply there, whole, present, as if that environment were familiar to her. This overlooked detail gradually gains strength, a confident gaze cast towards the screen, as if she knows more than she lets on. A slight restrained smile, not of provocation, but of someone who sees beyond the immediate moment. It's not disdain, it's awareness. Each of her gestures adds a new layer to the story, preparing the ground for something that cannot yet be revealed, but which is already beginning to have an emotional impact on those watching. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it is precisely at this stage of the journey that many stories are defined. Before the great revelations, there is always a period of silence laden with meaning. It is there that decisions are made internally, that transformation begins to happen, even without an audience. The black woman, by remaining calm, chooses not to react in his timeline, not to enter the game he proposes. This choice changes everything, even if no one notices immediately. The billionaire, on the other hand, continues to accumulate mistakes. Each comment, each disdainful glance, each attempt to reaffirm control builds an image that will later exact its price. He doesn't realize that his excessive self-confidence is fueled by a superficial reading of reality. He sees appearances, not context. He sees status, not trajectory. And this inability to see the whole picture reveals much about his own mentality. The suspense grows precisely because nothing is yet explicit. There is no announcement, no direct confrontation, no public exposure, only the growing feeling that there is a hidden layer beneath the situation. The viewer feels it. It's almost physical, a slight tightness in the chest, a silent expectation, as if something is about to fall into place. The story begins to move away from pure humiliation and enters the territory of social upheaval, built with impatience. These are the moments that define the impact of a narrative, not the immediate shock, but the careful preparation, the accumulation of ignored signs, the succession of small clues that together form a picture impossible to unsee when it is finally revealed. The black woman, without saying another word, is already leading this story in another direction, and the billionaire unknowingly is walking straight towards a revelation that will confront everything he believes about power and authority. Meanwhile, the atmosphere remains strangely normal. The film hasn't started yet, the lights are still partially on, but something has already changed. There's a different energy circulating, a collective feeling that this scene won't remain confined to that moment. A journey is unfolding there, made of choices, silences, and a truth that insists on drawing closer. And it is precisely at this point, when the details begin to outweigh the words, that the story gains enough depth to advance to something even more intense, something that will emerge from behind the scenes and become impossible to ignore. If you've also noticed these silent signs, comment below. I'm on this journey too. There is a precise moment when reality decides to assert itself, not with noise, but with a clarity impossible to ignore. It is when chance ceases to be chance and the backstage unfolds before everyone. In that movie theater, this moment arrives silently, almost elegantly. An employee approaches carefully, not with the posture of someone about to reprimand, but with the respect of someone recognizing an authority. The tone changes, the energy changes, and even before any more direct words are spoken, something in the air reveals that the story has just crossed a point of no return. The black woman is called by her name. Not just any name, but a name that carries weight, a trajectory, important decisions made away from the spotlight. The conversation is brief, objective, professional, nothing theatrical, nothing exaggerated, just the confirmation of something that has always been true, even when no one there knew. She is not in that cinema by chance. She is not an impromptu guest. She is not someone occupying an undue space. She is the producer of the film that everyone is about to watch, the mind behind the project, the ultimate authority that night. The impact doesn't come as an explosive shock, but as a silence that spreads quickly. The billionaire, until then self-assured, feels the ground give way beneath his own feet. In seconds, all the decisions he made there, every word, every look, every gesture of disdain, return like an uncomfortable mirror. The hidden truth reveals itself effortlessly, without the need for confrontation, and that's precisely what makes it all the more powerful. He realizes, almost too late, that he didn't humiliate an ordinary viewer. He humiliated the person who made that screening possible, the woman who made the film viable, who built deals, who made strategic decisions behind the scenes, the one who didn't need to prove anything because she always knew exactly who she was. His superiority mentality short circuits. The status that seemed to shield him now weighs like a visible burden. The awkwardness shifts sides, and it shifts definitively. The man who relied on money and elitist circles now avoids eye contact, recalculates his expressions, and tries to reorganize a posture that no longer holds up. There is no immediate apology, no rehearsed speech, only the silence of someone disarmed by his own arrogance. The transformation happens right there in real time in front of everyone. The audience feels it. There's a collective relief, an almost physical sensation of justice being served, not because of the reverse humiliation itself, but because of the restoration of something deeper, balance. There was no need to raise voices, expose anyone, or create a spectacle. The truth was enough, and this reveals something important about the power of truth. It doesn't shout, it doesn't need to convince, it simply exists. The black woman remains serene. There is no celebration, no explicit revenge. Her posture remains the same as before, firm, calm, and aware. This further reinforces the impact of the revelation, because it becomes clear that this was not a personal victory, but the natural consequence of a journey built with competence, vision, and correct choices over time. The respect that now emerges was not demanded, it was recognized. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this scene goes beyond the momentary satisfaction of seeing poetic justice happen. It speaks about mentality, about how decisions based on appearances often fail, about how the inability to see others as equals leads people to make mistakes that could be avoided with a minimum of listening and humility. The impact of this revelation is not limited to that space. It echoes in any environment. Where someone feels authorized to belittle another, the billionaire doesn't lose money there. He isn't ejected from the room. He doesn't suffer direct public punishment, but he loses something harder to recover, the certainty that he will always be on top. The transformation that begins within him is silent, uncomfortable, and necessary. For the first time, he is forced to confront his own image, reflected in the reactions of those around him. And that has a weight that no fine or formal reprimand would have. That's the power of well-constructed revelations. They don't humiliate, they expose. They don't hurt, they teach. And in this case, they teach without needing to explain. The woman who was the target of disdain remains in control of the narrative without needing to claim that control. The simple fact of existing in that place with legitimate authority says it all. As the environment reorganizes itself, it becomes clear that the story doesn't end with the revelation. On the contrary, it opens the door to emotional consequences, internal reflections, and changes that haven't yet fully manifested. There's something suspended there, a feeling that the newly exposed truth will still unfold in deeper layers. Because when a person is confronted with their own blindness, the impact doesn't end with the moment of shock. It continues to reverberate, adjusting perceptions, forcing future choices. And it is precisely at this point, when justice has already been served, but emotions are still settling, that the story prepares to move into an even more human, more delicate terrain, where silence speaks loudly once more. If this twist resonated with you in any way, comment below. This makes sense to me. After the revelation, the silence that settles in is not empty. It carries weight, meaning, and consequence. It is a silence that speaks louder than any previous discussion. The billionaire, who minutes before seemed comfortable in his position of superiority, now avoids looking at the screen, avoids looking at people, avoids looking at himself. The gaze that once swept across the room with confidence now descends, restrained, almost embarrassed. There is no anger, no explosion. There is something more difficult to deal with, the belated recognition of a mistake that cannot be undone. His expression changes because the penny finally drops, not just about who she is, but about who he was in that moment. Every decision made there, every harsh word spoken, every hasty judgment returns as an unsettling echo. Regret doesn't come in the form of an immediate plea, but as an internal discomfort that settles in and lingers. It's the feeling of realizing that the power he believed he had wasn't as absolute as it seemed. And that realization, for someone accustomed to being in charge, is profoundly destabilizing. The black woman, in turn, does not change, and perhaps that is the strongest detail of the entire scene. She doesn't assume an air of victory, doesn't demand recognition, doesn't require public apologies. Her posture remains the same, serene, conscious, firm. This reinforces a powerful truth. She never needed his humiliation to assert herself, nor the revelation to validate herself. Her authority always existed, even when ignored. The impact of this realization reverberates in the viewer because it dismantles the idea that worth needs to be proven aloud. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because this story ceases to be merely an episode of poetic justice and becomes a mirror, a silent invitation to reflection. How many times are decisions made based on appearance? How many times is someone underestimated for not fitting into a social, racial, or economic expectation? The real transformation that this scene proposes doesn't just happen to the billionaire, but to anyone who observes and recognizes themselves, even uncomfortably, at some point in this dynamic. The emotional impact of the revelation lies not in the role reversal itself, but in what it reveals about mindset. Status does not define character, appearance does not define competence, and true authority doesn't need to be announced. It is sustained by choices, by trajectory, by behind-the-scenes work rarely seen by those who judge too quickly. This truth, when it finally emerges, exposes how superficial judgments impoverish relationships and decisions. There's also a silent journey unfolding there, one that extends beyond that night. For the billionaire, it leaves the mark of a lesson that can't be bought. For those who witnessed the scene, it serves as a reminder that the world isn't as predictable as it seems. And for those watching this story, the inevitable question remains: at what points in your life have you been unfairly judged? Or even more difficult, at what points have you judged someone without knowing their whole story? The strength of this narrative lies precisely in this point. It doesn't point fingers. simplistically, nor does it turn anyone into a caricatured villain. It shows human beings dealing with consequences. It shows how arrogance exacts a high emotional price and how silent dignity has an impact that transcends any environment. It's a story about external revelations, but mainly about internal revelations, those that force us to revise old beliefs, attitudes, and certainties. The cinema, which once seemed merely a stage for exclusivity, transforms into a space of involuntary learning. The screening hasn't even started yet, but something much deeper has already happened there. The story makes it clear that no one is just the role they appear to occupy. Everyone carries invisible journeys, difficult decisions, and truths that aren't immediately apparent. And when these truths come to light, they have the power to reorganize everything around them. This is the lesson that hangs in the air. Underestimating someone is always a risk, not only because you might be wrong, but because it reveals the limitations of your own worldview. True transformation begins when you learn to look beyond the obvious, to listen before judging, and to recognize value where before there was only prejudice or indifference. This understanding doesn't end the story. It opens new layers of reflection that continue to unfold, because after the shock passes and the silence settles, questions remain that don't easily disappear. Questions about choices, about impact, about who we are when no one is watching. And it is precisely in this space where the story ceases to be just about itself and begins to dialogue with our own journey, that everything deepens even further. If this thought resonated with you, write in the comments, "This makes sense to me." And if you've made it this far, it's because this story resonated with you on some level. Perhaps it triggered a memory, sparked reflection, or simply made you see certain situations with a little more attention. That's exactly why this space exists, to tell stories that don't just stay on the surface, that carry meaning and help us rethink attitudes, choices, and how we look at others in our daily lives. If this type of content resonates with you and offers something beyond mere entertainment, stick around. Subscribing to the channel is a simple way to continue this journey, following stories that deliver poetic justice, human twists and turns, and reflections that linger even after the video ends. And if you want to, leave a sign that this message reached you. Write in the comments, "This message was for me." This helps create connection, shows that you were present until the end, and strengthens this space for real exchange between people who feel, think, and reflect together. If during the video you felt that silent connection, that's exactly it, leave a like. It's not just a click, it's a way of saying that this conversation was worthwhile and that this type of story deserves to continue being told. There's a video over here that complements this topic very well and delves even deeper into this reflection. Click and continue with me there. The journey continues.